Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started then. So, welcome, the four of you. Um, I hope that everything is going well in the class so far. I know that this week we're supposed to be doing Chapter 4 for lecture stuff, and I don't quite have all those videos up at this point. I think I have 8 videos up, and there are still a couple more. Because we haven't quite gotten through all of Chapter 4 yet with those videos. But I would bet that most of you are more focused on the exam and not so much on Chapter 4. But I do want to still remind you that Chapter 4 is still there, and you do need to be keeping up with that, because you don't want to try and do 2 weeks worth of lecture stuff next week, or to try and do everything right at the very end of this week. So do try to keep at least up, a little bit with those lecture videos. But like I said, probably most of you have questions about the exam. So would you prefer that I just kind of give a general explanation of the exam first, or do you want to start with questions, or how do you want to go about it?
A general explanation, I guess.
Yeah, the
Okay.
general explanation would be good.
Okay. So I did have someone ask a question on the email about, or through email, about what topics are going to be on Exam 1. So Exam 1 is going to be Chapters 1, 2, and 3. So it's Unit 1. And it's going to be the main topics from those chapters. I'm going to try, before we leave today, to go through pretty quickly the main topics that you should be studying, and maybe even tell you a few things that you don't need to worry about so much for the exam. This is what I normally do for my on-campus classes. Normally in the on-campus classes we actually take a lecture period, or a lab period. And instead of going into lab, we just stay in the lecture hall and we talk about the exam, talk about the topics on the exam, talk about things that we covered in lecture but aren't necessarily going to be on the exam, things like that. In terms of the sheer number of questions, Exam 1 is pretty large. I believe it's 41 questions, which is pretty big, but a lot of those questions are extremely short. So, like for example, I think there are 4 or 5 questions where the entirety of the question is just something along the lines of, here's a thing, classify it as either a compound, element, homogeneous mixture, or heterogeneous mixture. So if it was an on-campus exam, a paper exam, I would have 4 or 5 of those as well, but it would all be as one question. It would be like question 3, parts A, B, C, D. But the way that Blackboard is set up, I can't really have parts to questions like that. It's just every single part is its own question, essentially. So there are, I don't think there are really any large questions on the exam. The biggest questions would be a few of the unit conversion questions where you might have to do 2 or 3 conversion factors, and that would be it. That would be the biggest questions, especially in terms of math. That would be the biggest ones. So it would just, there's no questions where it's going to be a page worth of calculations to get the answer. They're all fairly short. Some of them are very short. And so even though it is a large number of questions, it's a little bit deceiving. So it's not quite as big as it seems at first. That being said, if the exams are done and I'm going through the exams, which I will have excuse me, I'll have to go through the exams to grade some of the questions. And so if I go through the exam and I notice that it seems like people didn't have enough time to finish it, so like everyone was going right up until the time limit, nobody was finishing early, then I will take that into account, and it's possible there could be a curve or something based on that. Now don't just sit it and wait it out until the very end, hoping that you'll get a curve as a result of that. But that is something that I'll keep in mind. I'm not unreasonable when it comes to things like that, but I believe that the exam, the size of the exam is reasonable for the number of questions and the amount of stuff in those questions. As far as the kind of questions that are going to be asked, the majority of them they're essentially like short answer fill in the blank, where it's or multiple choice. Those are the majority of the questions. So there's quite a few where it's like those like maybe a physical versus chemical change type of thing. So I would say, you have this thing and it undergoes this process. Is that a physical or a chemical process? And so in that case, it's just essentially multiple choice, really, with only two choices. And so again, there's a few of those questions in there as well, where it should be pretty quick. And so there's some questions like that. And then there are other questions, like there's some sig fig questions, where I just say, here's a number, how many sig figs does it have? Or here's a calculation, how many sig figs can the answer have? Something like that. So it's technically a fill in the blank, because you do actually input the answer, but it's not a, write a short paragraph or, write an explanation. It is just give the number. So there are quite a few questions like that, where you do a short calculation and then type in the answer. And that is the vast majority of the questions, are either type in a short numerical answer or multiple choice, picking the answer out of a list of options. Let's see. What else? Every once in a while I'll have things like matching questions, but I don't think I ended up having any of those on this exam. I think I've only had those on other exams. I think I did go ahead and change one thing that was, I believe, in the maybe in the weekly tasks, or not weekly tasks, but the chapter. I forget where I wrote this, but I think somewhere I had mentioned that the exam was going to be 80 minutes. I did go ahead and decide to give you 90 minutes instead. So it's a little bit more than the time that you would have on campus. In an on-campus class, you would have 80 minutes to complete the exam, because that's the class period. Class periods are 80 minutes long. But I did go ahead and I decided to give you 90 instead of that. And in the exam, I think for some reason I could change the description of the test that you see beforehand, but the test instructions, which is what you see once you actually enter the exam, I was not able to change that for some reason. It was very odd. It would let me change what you see beforehand, but wouldn't let me change what you see after. So once you actually go into the exam, it will still say 80 minutes, but that's wrong. You do actually have 90 minutes. Why it wouldn't let me change that, I don't know. It's very strange. But you do actually have 90 minutes for the exam, not 80. Any questions over that type of stuff? Not necessarily specific topics, but just generally about the exam?
I don't have any.
Are we just gonna find the exam on Blackboard?
Yes, and actually I can show you. Let me share my screen with you so you can see. So you should be seeing my screen right now. And if you come down here, and actually let me go ahead and put in student preview so it'll actually look like what you see. So this is what you should see when you come to the Blackboard site. And if you look down here at the bottom left corner, there's an exams tab. And right now, it's not there. But that is just because I set the exam to not become available until, I believe, 1 o'clock today, because I didn't want anyone taking it before we met together today to talk about it. because then that could cause all kinds of issues where if I talk about something here and I give you some tips and some pointers, and then someone says, well, I didn't have those when I took the exam, that's not fair. So I didn't even want to make it possible to take the exam before we met together and talked. So it'll become available at 1 o'clock today, and you can take it anytime between that point and I believe I set it to be due the same time as everything else, which was Sunday at midnight, which is a lot of time. You have plenty of time to take it, but keep in mind that once you start it, you have to finish it in that sitting. So you can't start it, take a break, come back the next day. No, it's once you start it, you have 90 minutes to finish it. So it's not like a homework set where you can start it and then come back later. It is a 90 minutes from the time you click, I think, begin. I think there's a button that you click that's, the name of the button is actually begin. And once you click that, I think the 90-minute timer starts. Okay, let's see here, we have a question. So, proctoring, yes. So the proctoring, it has been a mess, and I wish I had a better solution for this, although it's not necessarily a bad solution for you all, but it is a bad solution for me. So I was hoping that the testing centers would be open by this point, because there's no classes happening at the school, and so I thought maybe they could expand the testing centers, physically distance the desks, so that students weren't anywhere near each other while they took exams, but apparently that was shot down. And so there was no on-campus proctoring. And then they had a proctoring system lined up to come in. It was called Proctorio, I think is what it was called. And then at the very last minute, and by very last minute I mean like last week, that fell through. They could not get the software to work. So it wasn't an issue of like payment or anything like that. It's like they couldn't get it to work with our system in Blackboard. And so the Proctorio no longer worked, and so then their very last minute scrambled, and they did find another system called HonorLock, but that is brand new. They were just showing us how to use it like less than 7 days ago, and I just have not had time to incorporate it into the class. It is a bit of a process to get that into the class, get it set up in the I guess I can stop sharing my screen so it doesn't look like infinity there. So it takes a little bit of work, a little bit of effort to get that into the class, get it set up in the exams, get all the things the way that I should. And then in addition to that, for HonorLock to really work properly, you do have to have a webcam, which, as you said, Joni, is an issue, because that is not something that you were told you needed before you signed up for this class. And when it's something like that, when it's a technology thing and something that's not cheap, to get a webcam, even the cheap ones are $30 or so. Yeah, and it is very hard to find them. The one that I'm using now I just got off of Amazon. And for the longest time you couldn't find them even on Amazon. Even there were literally none. I looked at Amazon, looked at Best Buy, looked at Newegg, like all of them. The only ones that were available were like $600 webcams. Like, no thank you. I am not a professional YouTuber here. So, as I'm sure you all have noticed from my YouTube videos, I am not a professional YouTuber. So there's just a lot of issues with the proctoring. So for now, at least, there is no proctoring for this exam. So you're going to hop into the exam and you're going to take it just like any other Blackboard quiz, essentially, where you're just going to answer the questions. I am expecting you to not Google things because that is cheating. So don't Google things, but it is perfectly fine for you to use the lecture notes in your book and when trying to answer stuff. And again, I know that is not for you. That sounds great. For me, I'm not a big fan of open book tests, but again, just I could not. First of all, I just didn't have time to really effectively incorporate that into the exam for this exam. I didn't want to put the exam off. That would be terrible. We need to have the exam this week. And it just didn't seem right to say, okay, all you people in both, because I'm teaching 2 classes, everyone in both of my classes, I know we didn't tell you before, but guess what? You need to go buy this $40 thing for this exam. And it didn't seem like that would be a reasonable thing to do. Now in the fall, just FYI, I would expect that if you are taking an online class or a blended class or anything like that, be looking through the syllabi, because I would bet that every professor, including myself, will be including in there that you need to have a webcam for your class. So just a heads up on that. So if you're planning on taking classes in the fall where you know you're going to be taking exams online, it's likely that the testing centers will still not be open in the fall, which is frustrating. But it's possible you might have it open and you won't need the webcam, but just a heads up for the fall. Read the syllabus carefully and read the required materials carefully, because it's possible that professors will require you to do that. As far as the periodic table, really anyone would work. If you want to find one that you're comfortable with, you can print it off and just have it there, so you don't have to be flipping through the book or anything like that to find one. That's what I would do. I would print one off. Other questions about the theories and models mentioned and what they discovered? Yes, there will be questions about that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, Cameron. I'm going to try to go through the slides really quickly to point out things that you definitely should know, and that is one of them. But I will point out specifically which ones. You don't have to know every last thing from those slides. I will tell you specifically what I expect you to know. Although even with an open book, it wouldn't be all that hard to find it, legitimately. Let's see. Oh yes, so back to the proctoring thing. While there won't be proctoring for this exam, I am going to try and incorporate at least some of the honor lock stuff into later exams. Excuse me. So exam 2, exam 3, I will probably have some honor lock stuff incorporated, because not everything in honor lock requires a webcam. The most effective stuff does, but not everything requires a webcam. So for example, they have a way of like locking down your browser and things like that, and so I might try incorporating those, but for now anyway, we're not going to do that. Any other questions about the exam in general before I talk about what I expect you to know?
Can you explain significant figures whenever you're going over what's going to be on the exam more?
Sure. I can do that.
Okay.
I know sig figs can be confusing. Anything else? Okay, well,
How would you write the chemical formulas for say compounds with a what is it? um,
Polyatomic
polyatomic
ion?
ions. Yeah, with like the transitional metals. That was something that really got me hard in the lab. So
So writing the formulas, so if you're given the name and you're asked to write the formula,
yeah, so for like example, iron 2 nitrate or nitrite.
so iron, whoa, that's not what I was writing there. Why did it do that? Iron 2, nitrite you said?
Yeah.
So iron 2 nitrite, the way you would write that formula was be, first of all, you would find out what nitrite is. So nitrite, if you
I
look,
believe it was NO2. Yeah, NO2.
yeah, it would be NO2
And,
minus, right?
hmm and then iron would be Fe.
And it would be 2 plus because of the 2 here. So remember
hmm
the number in parentheses is the charge on the metal. So because we have iron with a positive 2 charge, and we have nitrite, which has a negative 1 charge, our guiding principle here is that the molecule that we make has to be neutrally charged. So
Right.
when we put them together, the end result has to be neutral. So to get this to be neutral, we would need iron. Goodness, this is acting really weird today. I want a curved line. Iron, and we would need, it is trying to predict what I want to write, and it is not predicting well. Um, and then we would need 2 nitrites. So we have iron, which is 2 plus, nitrite, which is 1 minus, so we need 2 of those 1 minus ions to get a neutral molecule. So this would be iron 2 nitrite. Does that make sense?
Yes. Um, I guess if I may ask another one,
Mm-hmm.
again on lab 3, it was that one I emailed you about, polonium. I don't know how to pronounce it. Charge of 4. I guess
It was polonium 4 telluride. Is that right?
yes. I what I have on my or what I wrote was just POT2.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't know if there's like a specific order I should have been writing those in. I went over the lecture video and said that the lower you go on the periodic table, uh, that's the element you would usually write first.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes, and POTE2 is correct on that, by the way. And so um, I call it POTE2 just because it looks like that's what it's saying there. Um, but yeah, POTE2 is the correct formula for that. Uh, and we know that's the correct formula because if polonium is +4, telluride is in the column, it would be column 16 with oxygen, so it would be -2.
mhm.
So if we have -2 from this, +4 from this, we need 2 of the telluriums in order to balance that out, and so it'd be POTE2. And so because they're both in the same column together, one of them is a metal, one of them is a metalloid, the one that's farther down, the metal, would come first. I don't know why my whiteboard here is having so many issues today, but it hasn't done this before. I wonder what's going on. Oh well. Let's go ahead and jump into the lecture slides here. So I'm going to, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through these pretty fast, and actually I'm going to stop the recording for just a second and then pick it up again, just so that we don't have one hour-long video. So we have the kind of the general exam stuff to start off with, and then we'll have the more specific stuff here. So.